Mid-13th century. The Mongol Empire is rapidly expanding its borders, capturing more and more new territories. Back in 1253, at a Kurultai in Mongolia, a decision was made to organize a campaign against the Ismaili Nizaris of Iran and the Abbasid Caliphate. The great Khan monk ordered his brother Hulagu to lead the upcoming campaign, under whose command the Mongol army was to conquer the Middle East. It should be mentioned that even before the decision was made to organize the campaign, the vanguard of the Mongol army was operating in Kyrgyzstan, commanded by an experienced military leader named Kitbuka. When all preparations were completed in 1256, the Mongol army set out on a campaign and began to destroy the Nizari fortresses in western Iran. An amusing fact is that it was in the Nizari state that an organization of assassins appeared, who terrified all the rulers of the Middle East. The fact is that the assassins easily made their way into the environment of a potential victim and completed the task even at the cost of their lives. In general, despite the small number of Nizari Ismailis, thanks to the presence of assassins in their ranks, the Middle Eastern rulers tried not to conflict with them. The situation changed with the arrival of the Mongol army. The fact is that the appearance of the Mongols was very different from the appearance of the inhabitants of the Middle East, so the assassins could not penetrate the environment of the Mongol commanders. Thus, neither the Nizari nor the Abbasid Caliphate could resist the Mongol Empire, which was at the dawn of its power, thanks to which Baghdad and all the Nizari fortresses fell into the hands of the Mongols at the beginning of 1258. Having established control over Iran and the Abbasid Caliphate, the Mongols continued their advance, and by rapidly advancing by 1260 they were able to establish control over Damascus, Homs and Aleppo. It would seem that a little more and the entire Middle East would be in the hands of the Mongols, but it turned out differently. In August 1259, the great Khan monk died, which began a struggle for power in the Mongol Empire. Therefore, having received news of the death of the great Khan, Hulagu decided, along with most of his army, to retreat to Iran, leaving under the command of Kitbuka, a small army with which he was supposed to maintain control over the captured part of Syria. The fact is that after the death of the great Khan, a civil war was brewing in the Mongol Empire, which is why Hulagu was forced to withdraw most of his army from Syria, since he might need it to protect his possessions. However, before leaving Syria, Hulagu managed to send envoys to Cairo, who demanded that the Mamluk Sultan Qutuz submit and not even think about resistance. It should be mentioned that the Mamluk Sultan Qutuz was amazed by the power of the Mongol army and its rapid advance in the Middle East, so he seriously thought about abandoning attempts at resistance, but Baybars and other Mamluk leaders persuaded the Sultan to start a war against the Mongols. The fact is that the Mamluks knew very well that Hulagu, along with most of his army, had left Syria, so they reasonably reasoned that they had enough strength to defeat the small Mongol army remaining in Syria. Having weighed all the pros and cons, the Sultan ordered the execution of the Mongol ambassadors and began hastily gathering an army. Meanwhile, Kitbuka also did not sit idly by, but expanded the territories under his control, capturing the cities of Baalbek, Ajlaun and Al-Qubayba. In turn, the Mamluks, trying to increase their chances of victory, offered the Kingdom of Jerusalem an alliance against the Mongols, but the local nobility was afraid to enter into confrontation with the Mongols and refused the alliance, but at the same time guaranteed the army of the Mamluk Sultanate free passage through its territory. At the end of the summer of 1260, the army of the Mamluk Sultanate, which was personally led by Sultan Qutuz, set out on a campaign. Historians still argue about what forces were at the disposal of the Mamluk Sultan, and some sources claim that the Mamluks managed to assemble an army of 100,000, but this is unlikely. More realistic are the statements that the Mamluk Sultan had 24,000 warriors at his disposal and only 4,000 of them were Mamluks. As for Kitbuka, he had at his disposal an army of 12,000, which included about 500 soldiers from the Cilician and Georgian kingdoms, as well as 1,500 soldiers under the command of the Emir of Homs al-Ashraf Musa, who submitted to the power of the Mongols. The Mamluk army quickly marched into Syria, planning to defeat the Mongols using their numerical advantage. Very soon, having passed Gaza, the Mamluks entered the territory of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, setting up a camp near its capital, the city of Acre. An amusing fact is that, once in the vicinity of Acre, Baybars suggested that Sultan Qutuz take advantage of the opportune moment and capture the capital of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, but Qutuz refused to attack his allies. Meanwhile, Kitbuka received information from his spies about where exactly the Mamluk army was located, and gathered his army and moved out to meet him. While the Mamluks in the vicinity of the Acre were replenishing supplies of provisions, the Mongol army bypassed Lake Tiberias from the east, planning to go behind enemy lines and cut off their path to retreat. However, very soon the Mamluks became aware of the movements of the Mongol army and, leaving their camp, they hastily moved towards the Ain Jalut spring, which was located in the Jezreel Valley, in order to impose battle on the enemy in a convenient place. The Mongol army moved in a column headed by horsemen from Georgia and Cilicia, who, unlike the Mongols, were familiar with the terrain and acted as guides. As soon as the Mongols crossed the Jordan River, they saw in front of them Mamluk horsemen led by Baybars, who were positioned on a hill. The Mamluks met the enemy with a hail of arrows, which hit the horsemen from Cilicia and Georgia who were in the vanguard of the Mongol army. Having come under massive fire, the heavily armed horsemen immediately attacked the enemy, trying to quickly overcome the distance separating them in order to force hand-to-hand combat on him. A bloody hand-to-hand fight began. Meanwhile, the first Mongol troops also crossed the Jordan River and, on Kitbuka's orders, began to enter the battle. As soon as the first detachments of the Mongol cavalry entered the battle, the Mamluks, unable to withstand their onslaught, began to retreat. The Mamluks did not flee, but retreated in an organized manner, firing at the enemy pursuing them and periodically conducting counterattacks, thereby preventing the Mongols from encircling themselves. The skillful actions of the Mamluks, as well as the fact that the topography of the valley did not allow the Mongols to maneuver and cut off the enemy's escape route, forced the Mongol cavalry to continue the pursuit in the hope of forcing the Mamluks into hand-to-hand combat. The pursuit continued and the Mamluks suffered serious losses, but nevertheless managed to lead the enemy into an ambush. Carried away by the battle, the Mongols, unnoticed by themselves, found themselves surrounded on three sides by the main forces of the Mamluks, led by Sultan Qutuz. The trap slammed shut and a hail of arrows rained down on the Mongol army from the hills surrounding the valley. Understanding full well that the situation was critical, Kitbuka ordered his soldiers to begin a false retreat, planning to lure the enemy to a more convenient terrain for battle. But Sultan Qutuz guessed the enemy's intentions and ordered his soldiers to hold their positions while continuing the shelling. Realizing that the maneuver was unsuccessful, the Mongols began to respond to the enemy's fire with their own arrows, but the fact that the numerical advantage was on the side of the Mamluks, as well as the fact that the Mamluk archers were on a hill, made the continuation of the firefight unprofitable for the Mongols. Knowing full well that continuing the skirmish would bring victory to the Mamluks, Kitbuka ordered his soldiers to attack the enemy's left flank, planning to overthrow him and go to the rear of the Mamluk army, while the remaining part of the soldiers was supposed to engage and battle the center and right flank of the enemy army. Despite the fact that the Mongols were in the minority, the training and iron discipline of the Mongol warriors gave them a certain advantage, and soon, under their onslaught, the enemy's left flank began to retreat back. Realizing that under the onslaught of the Mongols his left flank could be put to flight, Sultan Qutuz personally, at the head of his reserve, went to his aid. Meanwhile, in the center, using their numerical advantage, the Mamluks, led by Baybars, began to push back the Mongol horsemen. In order to gain time and allow his right flank to break the enemy's left flank, Kitbuka was forced to bring his reserve into battle, which made it possible to stop the enemy's onslaught in the center. Meanwhile, the left flank of the Mamluks was defeated and some troops began to flee under the pressure of the Mongols. It would seem that luck is on the side of the Mongols and very soon they will be able to win, but at that moment reinforcements led by Sultan Qutuz arrived on the left flank. Having removed his helmet so that the soldiers could recognize him, the Sultan entered into battle with the Mongols. This inspired the left flank of the Mamluks, which stopped moving back under enemy pressure. The bloody battle continued and it is unknown who would ultimately win, the Mamluks thanks to their numerical advantage or the Mongols thanks to iron discipline, but at that moment the unexpected happened. The Emir of Homs, who fought on the left flank, could not withstand the onslaught of the Mamluks and, together with his people, fled from the battlefield, thereby significantly weakening the left flank of the Mongol army. The Mamluks immediately took advantage of this and, pressing the enemy's left flank, they began to surround him. Realizing the inevitability of encirclement, Kitbuka's entourage suggested that he begin a retreat to avoid defeat, but Kitbuka refused and, at the head of his personal guard, entered the battle. The battle continued, but very soon Kitbuka was killed in battle, which completely undermined the morale of the Mongol army. Seeing the death of their commander, the Mongol army began to flee, and the Mamluks pursued the enemy in order to inflict maximum damage on him. Having been defeated in the battle and thereby losing a significant part of their army, the Mongols, knowing full well that due to the brewing civil war in the Mongol Empire they would not receive reinforcements, were forced to leave Syria and Palestine, which fell into the hands of the Mamluks. As for Sultan Qutuz, he never managed to reap the benefits of his victory. The fact is that after the victory, Baybars expected to gain control of Aleppo, but the Sultan refused him. Having held a grudge against Baybars, on October 24, 1260, when the Mamluk army was returning to Cairo, he killed Qutuz along with other conspirators, who immediately proclaimed Baybars the new Sultan. As for Syria and Palestine, after the Battle of Ain Jalut they found themselves under the rule of the Mamluk Sultanate for a long time. The fact is that Hulagu, having founded his state, waged a fierce war with the Golden Horde for control of the Caucasus and simply could not allocate enough forces to conquer Syria and Palestine. Despite the fact that the Battle of Ain Jalut did not cause serious damage to the military power of the Mongols, it was able to dispel the myth of the invincibility of the Mongol army. If you liked this video, be sure to subscribe to my channel and click on the bell so you don't miss new videos.